You are listening to Frog Talk, presented by Black Ribbon.
Thank you so much for joining me on Frog Talk. Today, we're exploring the critical role that frontline retail managers play in building company culture and representing brand values when facing a customer in the flesh. While we often discuss organizational culture from the executive perspective, today we'll examine how that culture is actually created, maintained, and evolved at the point where customers and employees interact. I have the great pleasure of speaking with Nathaniel Robinson, a tenured retail manager with nearly 2 decades of experience across industries from quick serve restaurants to wireless retail sales. Nathaniel currently serves as the Battleship Retail Store Manager at Prime Communications, where he's developed a unique 3 I's management approach: invest, inspire, and innovate. Welcome, Nathaniel.
Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for joining me, man. And thanks for reaching out. To begin, I want to get personal real quick. So I like to try and connect the dots between where you were and where you are. So how did you get here? Was there a catalyst in your life that sort of inspired your leadership philosophy and management style?
I definitely think, it comes from my background definitely plays a huge role in who Nate is as a person, professional, and, all around. So for me, I came from a very poor family. Again, family didn't necessarily make the right choices, didn't have any understanding of goals or anything. But with that being said, I always knew I was better than what a statistical idea of what somebody from my background comes from, in a sense. And with that being said, people I grew up with, some of them veered to a different track, where me and my brother, we sort of veered to the other side, where we're not going to be the products of our environment, is the best way to say it.
So then how did that upbringing, I guess, how did your youth and your childhood sort of inspire your leadership philosophy?
I think I've always been a leader. Again, at the end of the day, I'm the oldest of 2 siblings. So, brother, you got to listen to me. But I think at the end of the day, it's just the key factors that help in developing me to my leadership style now definitely are from those core events in my life, from essentially where my dad passed away, and then going on to those abilities to just be able to use what I learned from them and conduct it into my leadership style with empathy, being nice to people, for instance, but also having my mom, who built that work ethic, where I watched her just work every day for most of her time to make sure me and my brother had our necessities we needed, such as roof, clothing, and food.
Yeah, I can see how that would impact you. So then how, I guess, in your own professional career, 2 decades in various spaces, including management, different positions, and so on. Are you ever able to sort of pinpoint experiences that are connected, that through which you can sort of pull at specific philosophies in your style?
Definitely. I think, when I started back in my quick service restaurant days and I was managing a Subway, I didn't see it then, but those building points of teaching me how to do people management, financial management, all of the aspects of running a business, really I still take. And at times I'm I didn't like what you said as my boss then, but then I'll shoot him in text. I'm what you said made so much sense 5 years down the road. And having those abilities to just be able to pinpoint, that's really when it started. Again, I started out working as a shift leader at a Jack in the Box, moved pretty quickly up on that, had a better opportunity that offered me more money. So, continually each step I've taken to get to where I'm at today, it's definitely been strategic in my development and growth.
So was there like within your work history and your professional career, as it were, is there a story that you could share that talks about something that was like particularly challenging?
Probably going back to like my Subway days. Again, that was probably where stuff started to mold in a sense, but essentially, again, with that developing, I went through stages where I'm this really tough manager, I'm this really nice manager, but having that balance to understand essentially where when I'm taking and to this day, I have staff that it's like I still go back or I'll reach out to that mentor at that time. Hey, I'm running into this. Like for instance, I have an employee that has some accommodations we have to currently. So it's using those resources and finding ways to train them essentially in a way. But really, just as far as stories, it's hard to pinpoint one because, again, I've done this almost 2 decades, and out of that 14 years of it being in some sort of leadership role.
I love that you keep in touch with your former managers, your former mentors, and so on. That's really cool. That says something about your character as well, that you're able to maintain that kind of rapport over time and for a long period of time.
Well, and it's not all of them. Some of them, I probably won't talk to ever again outside of that professional thing. But, the nice thing is that, as I've learned from those mentors, that like the most success isn't necessarily at the time where I'm working for you, but seeing that growth over the time.
Are you implementing those same sort of teachings into your people now, the people who work for you?
I definitely say I try.
Yeah.
Again, especially with today's workforce, it's a completely different workforce it was 15 years
Yeah.
ago, even. Like, again,
The new
we've got
generation.
it really is. And it's taking and finding ways to relate with them in a way that it makes sense to them. Because, 15 years ago, it was work, 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 and continue to get promoted and you'll be successful. And that's, the American dream I grew up knowing is, again, work, work, work. And it's not necessarily the case with these people that are under the age of 30, I'd even say, and some of those that are even in their mid 30s. It's I want it now. And it's trying to help build and inspire those people to understand, hey, it's still the same work, 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 but this is how we can help you get to that next level or that next point.
That's such a good segue because, as we know, the underlying theme of all this is culture and company culture and how that work plays into people first mentalities and so on. So, in your case, both in Subway as well, like in your older gigs and your current gig, um, how do you translate like the broader corporate values? Because you're on the ground level. Like this is what's something, a lot of my guests, a lot of people in my space, when we're talking about company culture and so on, we're talking about it at the corporate level. We're talking about it at the organizational, like top level. And it's a rare opportunity to get a glimpse into what's happening on the ground, like physically on the ground, outside of the office, in the brick and mortar stores, in front of the customers, very hands on. So how is there a break between, this is what I'm so curious about. Like, is there a break between what's happening at corporate level, at the leadership stage, at the C-suite, I guess you could say, down to what's happening in your experience in your store? Or is that pretty streamlined?
It sort of depends on the initiative, I guess, at the end of the day, because there are some times where it's pretty streamlined, like sales processes. I mean, that's foundational no matter what realm of sales you're in. But then it comes into the how do we take and make this team fit into this mold? Because each team's going to be different at each store as well as customer base. So, I mean, for me, I call it my putting puzzle piece together when we have a change of something. For instance, how we greet customers has now changed. And, some older reps or older staff don't necessarily want to change because they're built into their ways. I mean, the newer team members that are on mine, it's not as hard of a change. So it comes down to how do I mediate between what my bosses and their bosses want, down to not necessarily the newer staff that don't have any foundation, but those that have been tenured and working for a year or 2, 3 years. How do we correlate that? Because at the end of the day, my job as their leader and their manager is to be able to connect that of how will this benefit us, or how does this take? And at the end of the day, it's finding that ability to just really sit down with them and have candid conversations at the end of the day. Because at the end of the day, I'm not going to be successful if they're not successful.
So how do you do that? Can you walk us through that?
Some of the process, I mean, it comes down to like the store I recently took over, where it's a higher volume store. Is I'm a very customer centric oriented individual. That's probably one of my key things, is I try to find a way to connect. And that store I took over with the senior staff, they definitely met one side of the coin, but the other side where we're not really taking care of the customer at the end of the day who pays our paychecks. So, I mean, trying to build that culture where it's not only going to be good for them when they're being nice to the customer, showing that we're not just here to sell you everything under the sun, but really taking that time to build a area that's welcoming, making it feel like people's second home, and giving them, as I like to say, that rock star experience without, all the craziness of it. But, in implementing, hey, we need to make sure we're doing it. If somebody's coming in for one issue, okay, let's do our best to solve that and find out what else we can do for them while we're there, and dealing with those lifestyle questions essentially. But I mean, in that success, that store I took over, I upped the customer percentage roughly from 69%, where we don't do less than 90% customer satisfaction now. So,
Wow, that's amazing. Good for you. So then, how does I guess, are the corporate values and vision being translated or even trained at your level? Is that something that's backed up, that's reinforced, that's, for example, monitored from corporate leadership? You said earlier that your VP visited just recently. Does that fall into his scope at all, or how does that work?
where it's unique in my VP visiting is he started out at the same level they did. So he's younger. We went through a lot of changes. I can't necessarily speak on behalf of my company or our partners, just because that's not what I'm here for at the end of the day. But I mean, when we have somebody that's coming in to oversee us, I mean, I feel there's not as much of a disconnect at the end of the day at corporal level, where there's somebody that not necessarily has that same background. So, I mean, for my specific company, I feel it's pretty well ingrained at the bottom level. Again, we have a lot of resources to take. I mean, but at the end of the day, it's my job to make sure they understand. So trying to take and build those bigger picture concepts into what it looks like when we're executing is the challenge with some staff.
The 3 I's that you and I have talked about a couple times, that's your framework. You created that framework.
Correct.
Tell me about that a little bit. How did you even come up with that?
It came in the process of actually interviewing people, because one of my favorite questions are, what are 3 words that best describe you as a person? So again, in that process, I'm like, well, that one of the people asked me, so how do you describe your management style? And it sort of threw me off, because at the end of the day, what is Nate's management style? And in coming, I'm like, what are the things that are core to me? Is I like to invest my time in people. I care about people. That's the empathetic side of me. What's another aspect? Well, I want to be unique. So that's where, coming into the innovative side of my management style. How do I take this team and correlate it to be different from a team down the road? Because at the end of the day, in the company I work for, there's one on every street in most bigger cities. So, but also just taking and that inspiring. So again, I don't want it for anybody that's listening or even staff I've worked with. The idea is I got to let them know a little bit about me, of how my framework worked. So, and at some level, they might not tell me, but hearing bits and pieces of my story might be more of a way to connect and be able to say, if Nate can do it, so can I.
I was at a conference last week, and there was that was actually a theme that was playing throughout the couple days, which is interesting, because I have so in my own teaching style, I don't typically like saying, if I can do it, you can do it, because we're not the same person, right? Like it's like it's implying that we're the same person. It's like, you have your ways of being motivated, you have your sense of discipline, I have mine, I have my abilities, you have your abilities, and so on. That said, there's ways we can reframe this or reshape this challenge that would work for you as an individual. On the other hand, what you just said resonated with me, because it's actually coming from the perspective of the other person. You're not saying, if I can do it, you can do it. They're saying, if he can do it, I can do it. And that's a totally different frame of mind. And that's something that came out of that conference, where the host, the person who put all of it together, was saying, try to get yourself in a room with people where you're going, if they can do it, I can do it, as a mode of inspiration and a way to motivate yourself in just reaching above what you think you're even personally capable of. So I love that. I really appreciate that approach.
Yeah, and I feel that's probably one of my strongest things in trying to connect with my staff, because at the end of the day, as a store leader or a leader in any, playing that mediator is not just exhausting physically sometimes, but mentally exhausting. It's sort of nice that my phone's turned off this next 4 days, because contrary to belief, my staff seem to think I'm a superhero. I need a little break here and there. So it's sort of nice just to not to disconnect from that, in a sense, because at the end of the day, this is a good opportunity for them. And I've set out, expectations why I'm gone for them, but giving them sort of free reign to sort of see, does Nate need to be there all the time?
That's awesome. So you're basically instilling a sense of autonomy and ownership in them
at the end of the day. So, I mean, it's always a goal I'm looking for that next worst person to take over my role so I can take over the next role. So, I mean, in building that sense of autonomy and giving them the ability to shine while I'm not there, it only, one, proves to my higher level people above me and myself that my team can do it at any time, regardless of whether I'm there or not.
Can you give me some practical applications on how you actually offer that ownership to your staff to become like true ambassadors of the brand rather than just employees following a script, as it were?
Yeah, I don't like scripts. So I will say that's probably the first thing. Like, I mean, when it comes to my process of training staff or wanting to build that culture, is sort of in that first week, I have them shadow me because if anybody can do it the best, it's the guy that's in charge of the rest of these people, and have them shadow team your staff, but taking and sort of learning their quirks, learning what makes them tick, taking the opportunity to instill that sense of being part of the team, because I know when I first started in a new place, even with the current company, sort of you're just that awkward new kid in school sort of vibe where you're like, I want to do good. I think I know it all, but at the end of the day, you're just being quiet and not talking to a person in the corner at the end of the day. So it's really, for me, when I build that culture, it's important to make them feel welcome. It's important to make sure that they feel they're valued from day one. I have a whole welcome packet I have set up for when I do get a new staff member with, usually a cool little jacket or pens, some novelty items just to sort of welcome them to the team, because those things play a key part into a first impression at the end of the day. And my goal is always, hey, I want you to greet this customer and see what they need at the end of the day. And, I'm able to observe sort of what do we need to tweak to get that. But most importantly, it's not making them feel like they're the odd man out when we're in a busy time.
Are you noticing, let me rephrase, do you believe you can speak for your team in saying how they would define the values of your leadership style? Like, how do they feel about working for you?
For the most part, I always say I'm a fist in a velvet glove at the end of the day, not in a negative connotation, but, with my management style and developing the invest, inspire, and innovate, necessarily I feel they all like me at the end of the day, but then there's those times where like we're humans. So having those candid conversations of, hey, this isn't what we were expecting, let's move forward, and coaching in a not negative annotation, but more in a way where it can be constructive criticism. Now, with that being said, I love hearing from my staff when it comes to, hey guys, is this working for you guys with this? Is this something we need to change? Am I seeming an instance? I'm not opposed to hearing their feedback and having those candid conversations, because at the end of the day, if there's something that necessarily isn't brought to my attention, I can't fix it as a leader to help adjust or reframe in a way where I'm still getting my point across, but also making sure that I'm taking into sense that I'm still approachable as a leader, which my staff literally will, hey, can I go talk to you in the back? Or, hey, shoots me a text or a call. So at the end of the day, I feel me being approachable says a lot more about my leadership style than me just being a dictator or a micromanager at the end of the day. So
That's really cool. Good for you. It's funny. My team makes fun of me sometimes, and they're like, they're they're like, you never get upset when we're just direct with you and say things that might upset you. You get upset when we don't say anything.
well, and that's so funny because at the end of the day, I'm sort of I'm built that way. It's like, okay, they're not saying anything. Is there something wrong at the end of the day? And when they are saying something, I don't get upset. But even if I'm at a point where there's something frustrates me, I don't act on it as a leader, because at the end of the day, me acting on it on an emotional basis versus an analytical of trying to figure out why did we get to this point. And, from perspective of the business, I am a representative, not just to customers as a brand ambassador and building a unique store experience, but also with my staff. I have to play that happy medium where we're not just acting on emotion, because once you start getting to those higher level, it's not necessarily needs of your personal feelings, but needs of the business.
You just made me think of something. Are you hiring your people?
For the most part, my DM hired them because when I transitioned into them, that position, that store had been dismantled, not because of anybody doing, but just comes with growth at the end of the day. In sales, it's always evolving. And I always say it's like building a baseball team at the end of the day. You have to find your key players for your specific spots. So, like, I got to do like their second interviews with the DM after they went through their first round. And I have my questions, and I'm always in the mentality of interviewing. One, I'm running a store, I'm busy, but 2 minutes to take and really interview them, get a vibe, and then go through with my DM on that. Do I see them here in 6 months? Do I see them here in a year? Are they going to be the next person to replace Nate?
Have you had to let any of them go ever?
So, not specifically in mine, not in this specific company I'm working for. I have in other companies. Again, and nobody likes to fire, especially when you're the face and you've worked with this person and you know their personal story. So, how I've always approached when it comes to having to let someone go is, again, I'm a very empathetic person at the end of the day. Like, empathy is just part of who I am. So, for me, I have to disconnect with that. More so when I worked at Subway, I had more control of that after we had done everything that we needed to as far as the company side. But it's definitely my least favorite part of a job is conflict when it comes down to any of that.
I guess in your current role in this current business, would you say the turnover, the employee turnover is typically high, or is it standard for retail space? Because that's pretty high in retail.
I mean, at the end of the day, retail in and of itself is a high turnover rate. Again, at the end of the day, not so much with my team do I feel I have a high turnover rate necessarily, because, but collectively, retails and sales in general is always going to be higher than a lot of other fields because we're a numbers oriented job. We don't get paid if we're not producing numbers at the end of the day. At the end of the day, for at least in the experience of the sales side, you know that it's not just one bad month and you're done. It's collectively over a certain period of time. But, my job as a leader and a manager is to what are we missing to help you get to where, you're successfully producing the numbers that are there. So, I mean, in general, turnover is just a reality of most retail spaces. It just, again, it's high, but it's been high forever and a day. I can't say that I've never heard, 300% turnover in retail. I don't know the national average right now, but again, that's sort of the name of the game in our business because, again, people have to want to be there versus people just trying to do a job where they can sit and not have to do a little work to find those sales opportunities.
That's what's tricky in your space at the ground level, because the programs that I put together, my culture branding programs, which we've talked about, is we're basically putting in systems and processes and protocols that trickle down through the entire organization at every level. So down to how you conduct interviews, to how you ask questions, and of course, the individual running the interview, for example, can ultimately make it their own so that it's genuine and it's authentic and they come across as such. But it's also coming from a certain directive. You have to sort of you have to make sure the interview process fits within a parameter that speaks to the culture of this company so that it reflects the brand in an accurate way, so that you're representing both the organization itself in a way that's real. You're representing yourself in a way that's real, and then you're representing your people in a way that's real, ultimately reflecting that accurately to the customer. So the market actually gets what the market sees, right? Like what you're putting out there is what they experience. Through that concept and what I just described, does any of that resonate with you in the sense that, are you getting, let's use the interview, for example, as an example, are you getting any sort of directive from the top, as it were, on how interviews should be run, and then sort of editing that yourself? Does that make sense?
When I conduct interviews, we have our standard X, Y, and Z questions that we have to ask regardless of it.
And that's a company directive, right?
Correct. Like we have a list of them. At the end of the day, I have more experience than some managers. So, okay, how do I relate this in a way that's going to be unique to my specific store, if it was hiring for my store or this store? So, I mean, at the end of the day, yes, we have a standard set of questions that we ask, but also we get free range because, again, those standard questions are standard questions for a reason, to make sure we're covering X, Y, and Z in that interview, but having the ability to use it, like one of my favorite ones I throw in there just to test their honesty. Do you wear a seatbelt when you drive?
That's a good one. That's a good one. Yeah.
Well, and people sort of get thrown off by it. And I've had a couple managers who are like, why do you ask that question? Well, one, it makes them laugh at the end of the day, but it also, at the core of it, are they an honest person? Like, yeah. So, I mean,
so if they say yes, are you like, are you sure?
Not necessarily sure. I mean, I question if we really want to hire you if you're saying, no, I don't wear a seatbelt when I drive a car, but it just one of those fun little interview questions I throw in there at the end of the day.
You're like, you're kind of a daredevil, huh?
Right. I don't know what that, my friend, but it's That's one of funny. Those just taking and having fun with it. At the end of the day, they're interviewing us just as much as we're interviewing them. So, I always leave open-ended questions even to sort of see what they expect.
The reason I harp on this particular area so much is because it's the place that most companies tend to neglect. It's the place that every company does. They do it with scrutiny. Interviews happen, regardless of however you slice it. Interviews are happening. Most candidates complain about the interview process statistically. It's never a walk in the park. It's whether if you're the higher you go, the more people you have to talk to. Typically, it takes long. It's very cumbersome. It's stressful, and so on. And it's a direct reflection of how, of why someone would even want to work at your company. And that's a direct reflection of the culture. So which ultimately impacts your brand and how people perceive you, right? And the reason I focus on that part is because I want to know, with your experience in your style, do you feel like candidates who you're interviewing feel seen, like they feel valued in that conversation? Do they feel respected? Do they feel like you're going to get back to them in due time, or just be honest with them as well?
For me, at least at my level, and even with other managers when they're conducting interviews, and it's more so for the managers that are doing their first interview, it's scary. It's not. I always harp on the fact that follow-up is key, regardless of whether we select them or not, at least at my level, because at the end of the day, they might not be a good fit for necessarily my team, but following up with them at least doesn't harp on that. I mean, at points in my time when I've applied for jobs, I'm not so much irked that I didn't get selected, but that follow-up process plays a key role in, because if I feel the interview went well, but it didn't, not following up is going to be more detrimental and put a bad taste on that company's culture, because it's not being authentic. At that point, I'm just a number. So follow up, I feel, is probably the key feature. And I make it, I set it by a date, and I'm like, okay, I'll call you on this date. I have a couple more interviews. I, again, don't try to, yes, I want this person or not, because you just never know. I have people I have to talk to now at this point if I want to move forward. But just following up with people is huge.
I'm so glad you said that. Yeah, because it's human. I mean, I was literally just talking to someone about this an hour ago. Like, the notion that, like, I don't care if you fire me, if you don't hire me or whatever, just be honest with me. Just like, tell me what's up. Feeling like you're in the dark just makes you feel crazy. And to your point, if you think an interview or a conversation went well, but they don't, and you're sitting there going like, what did I do wrong? I did everything right. It was awesome. Like, it should have been great. I should have been hired. And they're not hearing anything back. And the worst is when you follow up with them and they still don't respond to you.
So frustrating at that point. Like, at the end of the day, I've luckily, most of the time have the ability to, I feel, do pretty well in an interview. I've had some flops. It's frustrating when you don't. Like, whereas my wife, she has to spend 5 hours prepping for that interview because she just doesn't interview the same way. She's more introverted than extroverted. So, I mean, the follow-up is key. I'd rather be told I didn't get it so I could move on to the next one, because, again, who knows if that person's turning down opportunities that they could be a good fit in. And at the end of the day, it just shows the value of that individual of, didn't do it here, but I may have another opportunity at this place for you.
Man, I have like so many things I want to ask you.
Picking my brain today. Go ahead, my friend.
I actually want to pivot a little bit. So I know you're a big fan of and a huge advocate for personal branding. So how does your approach to personal branding, or how do you approach personal branding as a manager, and do you help your team members sort of develop their own approach to personal branding? Is that something you even talk about at that level?
100%. So you're going to laugh at like what my references are for my personal branding, but they're authentic to individual brands. So, like, again, during COVID and I was doing Instacart, quite literally, I really got into reality TV. I'm not going to lie, that was my hobby there. But taking into account like the Kardashians, Dance Moms, RuPaul's Drag Race, for instance, like, granted, they're all in this big umbrella, but you got to give it to them. They have a way of marketing themselves to be authentic. And again, that's really when I started, when I came back to work for the current company I'm at. Essentially, how do I do my own personal spin on that? And just watching reality TV and sort of seeing, okay, like, I say what you want, but the Kardashians are great at branding themselves and being able to. And
That's true.
What is it they do different compared to other ones? It's not necessarily social media, because again, you say you want to be an influencer. I'm sorry, but that is way too much time to be dedicated. The most time I dedicate is my LinkedIn. That's it, pretty much at this point. But taking little tips and pieces from them. I'm not going to sit there and tell my employee, you got to watch an entire season of Kardashians or something.
Can you imagine?
Right?
It's like a requirement for the job.
No, I don't think my upper management would approve. But, me personally, taking what is it they're doing that's working for them at the end of the day. Again, they have an unlimited amount of resources that they can do that. Whereas I'm a store manager. So what am I going to use based on what I learned from interviews watching with them to uniquely put on that, where it's the not necessarily who I sell for, but I got to get that person to buy from me at the end of the day. So how do I take and make that unique? Word of mouth is always my biggest advocate there. It spreads quicker than anything else, but looking at Google reviews of a store I'm taking over, taking and looking at staffs where they're at in their development, taking and helping the staff understand at the end of the day, we're our own unique brand ambassadors for our store. Again, I don't care as a whole what the other managers are doing. How do we make ourselves stand out? And it's, for me, the team follows. I'm very customer oriented. So again, naturally, that's going to be our biggest focus.
Are you at all motivated by, in helping them develop their personal brands, by helping them develop sort of a career path to create opportunities for themselves?
Absolutely. I think that's probably, from a field level manager, one of the biggest successes is when you see one of the people that you help develop. Fun story, I had a staff where me and him sort of got put together and it just ended up being where, again, I probably beat my head against the wall for the first 4 months of trying to figure out, why is this guy just not motivated? What is it I'm missing? Because I'm a likable guy. He likes me, but I can't get him to do the job easily. And, at that time, it was a growth period for me, because now I'm into the people managing side and not so much the field level sales side, where I have to deal with customers. Because again, contrary to belief, when they see the name tag manager, I'm Dr. Phil right away, and I get to hear all their problems, and that's not what I'm there for. But it's very, I guess, a sense of pride when I see my staff that have been under me being successful and being top performers in our specific field too. Because at the end of the day, obviously, 7 months of spending time with you, more than I see my significant other or family. And, that's the reality is, what is going to help them be successful, whether it's for a short time or a full on career. And now he's starting to ask me and my boss about wanting to be a manager. So, I mean, I win right there at the end of the day, because I helped develop that.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. That's why the work environment is so important. I mean, my philosophy. It's the catalyst for change, like societal change in creating just a better quality of life, is in the workplace, because that's where we spend most of our time. So if you're feeling stressed and you're having a bad day and you work in a shitty work environment, then you're going to go home and you're going to take it out on your family. You're going to take it out on the people you love, and so on. And if you can come home happy because your superior is awesome, your teammates are awesome, everyone feels part of something, they feel ownership, they feel seen and motivated, and all the words, feel good about themselves being there, can answer the question why they would want to work for you. And it's a positive, absolutely raving response. And what else do you want? But that takes effort. It takes listening. It takes empathy. It takes, paying attention.
Speaking of empathy, just on that, I don't necessarily think when I was rising through the ranks that was necessarily a key feature in management style at the end of the day. I feel empathy has become more, especially post-COVID. Again, mental health plays a huge role. I'm taking a 4-day break just to mentally reset, because you need that in your life now, and empathy plays. I can't just say when I have somebody not necessarily wanting to show up to work because they're having a bad day, I can't sit there and say, no, you have to. But again, okay, what is it we're running into? Because it's my job to be able to pick up on those key things. Is it something work related? Is it personal? Now, I don't need to know details if it's personal at the end of the day, but if it's work related, what is it that's bogging you down? Is it X, Y, and Z? So finding a way to revitalize and have that empathy plays, I think, a key role in any management style, regardless of what level you are now.
And that was a fantastic closing remark, because we got to wrap up. Thank you so much, brother, for being here. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you reaching out. This was a really awesome conversation. Tell our guests how they can find you to learn more about your style and how you've sort of mastered this management space.
So, I mean, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn. That's probably my Facebook of the day now. But again, Nathaniel Robinson, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to shoot me a message if you have questions.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, brother. We'll talk soon.
Yep. Talk to you later.